Do you want your employees not to just know that you value them, but to actually feel that you value them and have that feeling actually make them more inspired to work and more impactful in their work? If that's the case, then you are in the right spot. Today, we are going to learn why you can't just say you value your people, you have to do more than that. Hey, my dear, I'm leadership development coach Kathy Archer, and I help women enjoy impactful leadership. And in these interviews, I help you get the confidence, the courage, the composure, so that you have the capacity to lead, so that you do actually enjoy impactful leadership. Normally, I share this into my Confident Women Leaders community, which we are doing a recording instead of going live, but I will ensure that the link is in the notes. Leadership can be a lonely position, and it shouldn't be. And in our Confident Women Leaders community, there is a group of women who get to support each other, and we get to learn from each other as we run our nonprofits. Today, in this interview, I am interviewing Bill Scott. Welcome, Bill.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, let me introduce Bill to you all as I scroll and make sure I have my notes for this. All right, Bill is a management consultant, an innovative trainer, facilitator, and consultant. He is an appreciative inquiry expert. And that means he believes that challenges that limit innovative thinking can be reframed as opportunities that open up possibility and creativity. That's all about shifting that perspective that I talked to you guys all about. Bill is a university instructor. He spent 21 years in the social profit sector, including the last 9 as an executive director. And he just happens to be my business partner in the Magnetic Workplaces work that we do, where we help you create engaged workplaces where people enjoy their work and together you do meaningful work. So Bill, before we dive into the stuff around valuing people, can you tell us how you kind of got to the point where you are in your career now? You started out in nonprofit. Tell us just, briefly about the transition to where you are now.
Yeah, I think that what happened was there was a shift in the political environment in BC, and as a result, there was a real trend towards what I would call treading water for leaders in the nonprofit sector. And I just decided that I didn't want to continue to do the things that didn't bring me joy. And the pieces that did bring me joy, the planning, the creative thinking, the ideation, the innovation, those were things that I didn't feel I could do on a regular basis as an ED. And so I got out and became a consultant to many nonprofit organizations in BC and across Canada.
And so tell us why valuing people is so darn important.
Well, I think it's so darn important because we have no other way to improve the productivity of our organizations. Throughout the 80s and 90s, we stripped organizations down. We took away layers of management because we felt that we needed to reduce costs. And the reality is that the only way that we're going to get the kind of productivity that we need in any kind of organization, whether it's government, nonprofit, or the for-profit sector, we need to find better ways of engaging people and connecting what it is that they value with what it is that the organization's mission and goals are.
Can you give me an example of where maybe that either doesn't happen or where it does happen? Like you talk about mission and engagement and, meaningful work. What does it look like when employees are not engaged, not doing meaningful work?
Yeah, I think what it looks like is that you have people who are simply punching the clock. And, if something else comes up in their day that interests them more than work, they'll find a way to get out of the work in order to do what interests them more. Or they'll put in the minimum amount of effort. Study after study is showing us that people tend to put in as much effort as they need to get by if they're not engaged. And those same people will tell you that they could put in a lot more effort, they just don't. And that's what it looks like to me. It just looks like a lack of productivity.
Yeah, and I noticed sometimes when I was in nonprofits that it would be, people would be, can you cover my shift? And there was like silence. Nobody was going to help somebody cover a shift. Or, people would do their work, like go visit their client or do the work they had to do, finish the paperwork, and just leave. And when things changed and people became more engaged, you've seen a little bit more passion and maybe a little bit more conversation, and you've seen people really fight harder for their clients' rights and things like
Yeah.
that. So it was subtle shifts, but you could tell when people felt like they were doing meaningful work.
Yeah, and I used to have a little test, if you will, of when I thought people were engaged. And the test was I would go down to the break room about 10 or 10:15 and see how many people were there.
Mm.
And when there were lots of people in the room at 10:15, I took that as a sign that something was not going well in our organization, that there was some undercurrent that I needed to find out about. Because when things were going really well, people weren't doing the, well, it's 10, so I got to go take a break. Quite often, I'd find them in the hallways talking to one another about things that were totally non-work related. And yet at the same time, that relationship building that they were doing was creating that sense of camaraderie that you're talking about, in terms of,
Mhm.
yeah, maybe now I'll cover your shift for you because I know you as a human being, and I know when you ask for something like that, there's got to be good and sufficient reason for it.
Yeah.
So I really think that that's a piece of engagement, is that, you allow people the opportunity to create relationships at work, because we're social animals and we need that opportunity to have conversations with one another and get to know each other as people.
Hmm. And what part of that is the leader's job?
Well, I think the leader's job is always to create the conditions that allow innovation, creativity, relationship building. It really is about creating the container for those things to happen. And I'm not entirely convinced that it is solely the leader's responsibility. As you know, I really think of leadership and followership as functions and not
Mhm.
particular roles. And I think people throughout the course of their time working together step in and out of leadership roles and followership roles, depending on the needs of the organization at that particular time.
Okay, so I know that, but the listeners may not quite understand it. So
Hmm.
tell us what you mean by the function rather than the role of leader follower.
Sure, maybe I can offer it as an example.
Yeah.
When I was managing a social profit, nonprofit organization, it was primarily children, youth, and family issues that we dealt with. And so, if something came up where I had to put a proposal in because I had signing authority for the agency and so on, around pregnant and parenting youth programs. I know enough about that to get by. I know enough to, write the proposals. But, in terms of content, in terms of the actual, what are we going to do
Yeah.
when we're working with these young people? I needed people from those programs to do it. They became the leaders in that instance, and I would step
Yeah.
back into what I would consider a followership role, because they knew the subject matter better than I did.
Hmm. Hmm.
So that's, to me,
Yeah.
that's the function of leadership and followership, as opposed to the role of executive director and direct report.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Okay. So what are the key things people need to understand around valuing people?
I think first and foremost, if people didn't take anything else from this conversation we're having, it would be about valuing people being a philosophy. It's not something you can turn on and off.
Mhm.
I'm of the belief that the reason that 70% of all change initiatives fail is because there's some kind of model that people have been invited to implement by rote.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not necessarily part of them. It's not necessarily part of their value system.
Yeah.
But it's simply, we need to do step one, followed by step two, followed by step three. And, and it's not part of who that individual is. I think valuing people really is about a philosophy of being with others. It's about
Mhm.
relationship building, and it's about, treating each individual as a unique human being that has unique needs and unique strengths and unique everything else. So that to me is the key.
So I have a lot of clients who want to be that real supportive person and caring person, and so they'll do things like gratitude, or they'll write cards, let's say, or notes to their staff. But it's almost done like it's a task they have to do, like a tick box. I have to write 3 cards this month to three staff, and they might like have a running list. Okay, it's these 3 this today, and they just write it. And energetically, it just doesn't feel like I'm connecting with that person, it feels like it's a task I have to do.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is find out what fits for us, because for some people that writing, that physical writing, is not them. You know,
Yeah.
that's not part of their being. That is for me. I love to write, and so that was one of the things I did. I had a set of blank cards in my desk drawer, and whenever I saw something, I'd get out the card and I'd write in it. But for other people, it may be, you know, kind of walking alongside that person and, you know, saying, hey, can we walk over to the local coffee shop and get a coffee together, and having a conversation with that individual and telling them, you know, specifically what it was that they really appreciated about, you know, the work that they did.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, again, it's about finding the connection between who you are as an individual leader, and the needs of the people that you're working with. I think too often what we find is that leaders are responding from their own perspective. I'll give you a quick example. You know, as you know, I live in the Vancouver area, and Vancouver is a very multicultural area. And there are some cultures where if you publicly recognize a single individual in public, that would be seen as a shaming incident, as opposed to it being
Mm-hmm.
something that they're really looking for. But if you're the sort of person that feels, hey, I've got to recognize people publicly, or else that recognition isn't going to feel
Yeah.
real, then you're responding to your own needs in that situation, as opposed to what it is the person you're recognizing needs.
Mm-hmm. And so that's about getting to know your people, because you wouldn't know that if you didn't talk to your people.
Absolutely. You know, I remember one of the first gigs I had as a consultant was going in and being an interim executive director. And within the first week, I'd interviewed, using appreciative interviews, probably 50% of the staff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the focus was for me to understand what they were doing well, because I'd been brought in because things weren't going well.
Right.
And I could have focused on that and tried to fix the things that weren't going well. But what my choice was to find out what the organization needed and work towards that, as opposed to trying to fix the things I was told were wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I really do believe that that's a critical aspect of moving organizations forward, and really a critical function of leaders. That's that creation of a container that I was talking about earlier.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Another example came to me this morning. I was listening to, and I forget her name, the lady that wrote the book Fierce Conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know that? I can't remember her name.
Sorry, I don't know the one.
Yeah. Anyhow, she was saying, uh, you know, having the courage to say to your employee, hey, you know, we just had this meeting and I'm looking for some feedback about if my efficiency at running meetings. Can you give me some feedback? And so that's that flip almost, I think, of follower leader, but that you value their input as well, not just their work.
Well, exactly, and I think it really comes down to how you go about framing those questions, right? You know, we've talked a little bit about appreciative inquiry, and that's really the basis for a lot of the work that I do. But a real key piece to an appreciative question is not knowing the answer, right?
Mm,
And I think a lot of leaders go in with questions that are going to cement the view that they already had, as opposed to going in humbly and curiously and looking
yeah,
for, you know, answers that they don't know the answer to. I think a real
yeah.
key function for leaders is to be okay with uncertainty or ambiguity.
And that's not hard for some people.
It is hard, you know, and it's hard because, you know, the way that many of us were brought up through the system of leadership is, once you get to be the leader, you're in charge.
The
Um,
expert.
you're the expert, and I can't tell you the number of times I would stand up in a staff meeting and say, I don't have the answer for that one.
Yeah.
I'll go and find it, but right now, the best I can do is tell you, I'll go look for the response that you're looking for, but I don't have the answer right now. And I know early on in my career, when I first took on that leadership role as an executive director, I'd make something up.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because I didn't want to appear stupid, or you know, unintelligent, or whatever, you know, was going on for me.
Well, and that really hits on the imposter syndrome, and certainly women leaders struggle with this for sure. I mean, all leaders do, but I know women leaders specifically do. Is if you don't have the answer and you know, say I don't have the answer, then yeah, I'm a fraud. Somebody's going to catch me in this position, and realize that maybe they moved me into the position and when they shouldn't have. And there's all of that inner doubt and fear and insecurities that creep up. And so that's why sometimes we'll make up answers that we don't really know if they're right or not.
Yeah.
And then that just flips everything on its head, because if it's not right, then people lose trust and faith in us anyhow.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we just need to have the confidence, and I know you write a lot about this, to be vulnerable with the people that are around us. For the most part, I think the people around us want us to succeed.
Yeah.
And I think that the more human we are, the more that we look like them, that
Yeah.
we have the same vulnerabilities, the more likely we are to have success working with those
Yeah.
folks. Yeah.
Okay, so what are the underlying principles of valuing people?
Well, I think that the first piece is about being strength-based and appreciative. And I want to be really clear about this, because I think one of the knocks against appreciative inquiry is, well, it can't always be about the positive. And that's not what appreciative approaches are about. Appreciative approaches are about generativity. And it's about not ignoring weaknesses or deficits. It's about coming at them from a different angle. So, telling people what it is you want as opposed to what you don't want. So for us, we've talked about, magnetic workplaces. I know people who talk about how can we deal with the problem of absenteeism or
Mm-hmm.
turnover. And to me, if we're instead talking about what does it take to create a magnetic workplace, a place that people just can't wait to get to, if we're taking care of that issue, there's not going to be a whole lot of absenteeism or turnover. So I think
So,
that's a really key principle for it.
so explain, I know that was an example, explain the difference between positivity and generativity.
Yeah, positivity is simply looking at it from the angle of, what's positive and what is good about it, and
Yeah.
ignoring pieces that may not be positive. So the negative side of things, right?
Yeah.
Generativity is, how do I take something to that next level, and
Yeah. It
think of it as
builds, right?
an upward spiral. I mean, if you
Yeah.
think of a
Yeah.
spiral staircase, that really is kind of what generativity is about. It's about getting to the next plateau,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the next landing of the staircase, if you will,
Yeah.
and then gathering yourself and getting ready for the next trip, because it's a never-ending trip that you're going on in
Mm-hmm.
terms of upward mobility.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I'll take this just a connection, just to help people understand, because I often talk about emotions. And so to move from rage to anger is actually a generative move.
Mm.
Right. And so I can be angry, and then maybe I'm hurt, and then maybe I'm disappointed. And so it's not like I'm raging and, oh, la, 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 I'm happy. No, no, no. There's a progression, and it's continually generatively building on to the next level. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy, and it certainly works for me.
Yeah. Okay. What are the other underlying principles?
Well, I think that part of it is that we all have unique strengths, and we need to leverage those as employers. If I can tell you a short story, I think I may have told you this one, but we were working, a colleague of mine and I, with a group in Kentucky, and they asked us to look at how we might be able to better value their people. And so we asked them to send us, all the documents they had for their onboarding processes that allowed people to understand what was expected of them.
Right. When they
And
were
so they,
hired.
yeah, and we
Yep.
did this electronically, and so they sent us 38 pages of materials related to what was expected of their new hires. So then we sent them another email, and we said, please send us everything that your employee can expect from you as an organization. And we waited a week, and we had a feeling that we weren't going to get anything. So we sent a follow-up email, and we got a response to the follow-up email that said, I'm sorry, we don't have any materials that we can send you on that.
Mm-hmm.
So on the one hand, you have 38 pages of stuff that the organization expects from its people. And on the other hand, you have nothing
They don't do
that the
nothing for you.
employee can expect from the people they're working for. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that balance is just flat out wrong.
Yeah.
Every organization needs to exist to fulfill its mission and vision and values and goals.
Mm-hmm.
And people who come to work for you have their own personal needs, their
Yeah.
ambitions, their career goals, and so on. And we need to find a way to blend those two together, because I think that's how you get engaged employees.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I guess the next principle of it, I think, is to make sure that we have this sense of people uh, constantly getting better at what it is that they do, that we're creating growth and learning opportunities for
Hmm.
people. And again, that those growth and learning opportunities take into account the uniqueness of each individual as well as the needs of the organization. Nobody is going to say that people, are going to come to work and that you're going to take care of them, and it's all about their growth and development. But we need to find the balance.
So we know that there's not a lot of training dollars in nonprofits. How else can a leader value their people's growth and development without training dollars?
I think they need to start thinking outside the box. The fact of the matter is that we don't need dollars for training.
Hmm.
Um, if you do an inventory of the skills and abilities that people have, particularly the skills and abilities that aren't related to the particular job that they're in,
Yeah.
you're going to find a wealth of resources. And so, what if people were given opportunities to do 1 hour brown bag lunches or half day workshops for their colleagues, and
Yeah.
they were gaining the experience, where it's a peer situation. I really think the excuse of not enough money for training is just cover for I don't want to get around to it,
Yeah. Yeah. Or I don't know how to do it,
or I don't
perhaps.
know how to do it. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Which again is just is so find out.
Yeah.
And that might come back to that piece of saying, I don't know, does anybody else have an idea in the team how we can do this?
Yeah, no, exactly. I just think that there's so many resources that are out there. I read a study at one point where they suggested that organizations leverage about 10% of the assets that the individuals in their organizations bring to the job.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's just, yeah, that blew me away. When I saw that, I went, wow, there are so many things we could be doing in organizations if only we took the time to understand what people bring.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and they bring so much. I mean, you were talking earlier about appreciating and stuff. And I think you have to create the container. And I'm not the greatest host in the world, but there are people who love doing the birthday parties and the get-togethers. And so then let somebody be that person. That doesn't have to be you as the leader.
No, exactly. And a really good example of that was when I was an executive director, and I'm a very abstract thinker. And when I first got to the place that I worked at, I had a very concrete board.
Mm.
And you can imagine that some of the conversations were sort of like this,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, and we weren't connecting. But the assistant executive director that I had at the time was able to operate on both planes really well.
Mm.
And so even though at board meetings it was supposed to be me providing the
Right.
executive director's report, quite often it was her,
Yeah,
because she could take the abstract thinking and put it in concrete terms that would
yeah,
allow
yeah,
them to hear what needs to happen tomorrow as opposed to my 3-year plan.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I think we've covered anything else there before we jump into the key skills?
No, that's good. That really
Okay.
works.
So what are the key skills required to value people?
Well, the first one is, clear conversations that are humbly and appreciatively based, that where you don't know the answers. And I also think that they need to be open and candid. I mean, we need to be vulnerable, and I think that when we talk about the container, really is a leader's responsibility. Brene Brown, as you know, talks about rumbling with vulnerability, and it
Yeah.
isn't about inappropriate disclosure. It's about letting people know that that there are pieces that need to be talked about. So that would be for me the first piece, is to make sure that we have these empathic, open-ended conversations that people really are able to be vulnerable in.
Yeah.
And that'll take time, because if that's not been the case in the organization, it's okay. Well, we need to find a way to make that happen. And I think that one of the ways that I found to make that happen the easiest over time is to simply acknowledge what's been,
Mm.
and to also say, look, it's going to take us some time to get to this new place, and I'm here to tell you that I'm going to take the time that is necessary for us to get to that new place. That I don't expect it to happen overnight, because if people have built walls, it's for good and sufficient reason. And if they built them brick by brick, they probably need to be taken down brick by brick.
Yeah. It does
Yeah.
take time. And I just want to hop over quickly to the work that you and I do around magnetic workplaces. Is that long-term work? Is that figuring out what's going on for you, the triggers, the stuff that holds you back, being able to have that vulnerability to go back in and have some of those tough conversations. Because I think, whether we're valuing people, whether we're creating an engaged workplace, whether we're creating confident leaders, it all takes time. This isn't, like you said earlier, a switch you turn off and on. This is that generative growth piece for individuals and organizations.
Yeah, I really think that that's an important piece, that, the organization has particular needs that are going to need to be taken care of, and the individual does, and it's going to take time. And one of the most difficult pieces is when they're not, when the organization and the individuals aren't on the same timeline.
Yeah.
A colleague of mine and I, we use the analogy of the seasons for organizational change.
Mm-hmm.
And so you might be as a leader in the spring, right? Where you're sitting there planting and just excited about what's going to come up in the summertime and can't wait till be able to do all the harvesting. And you've got people who are still stuck back in winter dealing with, grief and loss around the old things that they're losing and so on. And I think that the problem many organizations find, or many leaders find, is that they feel they've got to drag people forward with them. And I don't think that works very well. I think you need to really allow for the time it takes to move from one stage to the next, and realize that the timing has to be right for both.
Yeah. Well, and I love the stuff around change from William. Oh my goodness, why is the name not coming to me? Anyhow, the grief and loss issues. You have to let go of stuff before you can move on. And so as an empathic leader, you have to slow down and have those open and vulnerable conversations. And you need to tune in and actually listen, not just go, yeah, I got it. It sucks. Let's go on.
Yeah.
You got to actually stop.
Yeah.
Okay, next.
Well, another key skill, I think, is that we need to co-create employment goals. And I think the reason for that is because too often we simply hire somebody and turn them loose, or worse, hand them the 300-page policy and procedures manual, ask them to read it all in a day and sign off that they understand it, and then send them out to the job. So, I think that if we sit down and we co-create employment goals based on what it is that's expected, and if we can get to the point where we're managing the outcomes of that conversation as opposed to the input, constantly being on top of people saying, well, this is how it's got to happen. Particularly in the nonprofit sector. I mean, when I was in the child, youth, and family services field, people operate from so many different theoretical perspectives, and it's difficult to be an expert in all of them.
Yep.
And so who's to say that, person-centered counseling is, better or worse than Adlerian, for instance? And so if that's the case, how do we get out of the way of allowing people to do their jobs? Unless you have a contractual obligation. I mean, now you're looking at something different, but then you should also be looking at how do you hire somebody properly for that. So I don't know why my phone is going off, but if you can just let me turn that off.
I can't hear it, so you're all good.
All right, good. My apologies. Anyway, I think that that's a good part of it. Is making sure that we have the opportunity to co-create the goals, so that people have the ability to share perspectives. That's an opportunity for us to have those conversations.
Well, and I want to just take that you mentioned a second ago, not just co-create the goals, but co-create the outcomes. I believe, and you can add to this if you want, but I believe you need to have at minimum monthly one-to-one sessions with your staff. That doesn't have to be like an hour sit down, but you do need to have ongoing conversations about how's it going, what's working, what's not, where do we need to course correct, where do you need resources, what do you want to celebrate? And if you're just doing that haphazardly, it's not going to be as effective as if you do it consistently with a little bit of an agenda, at least.
Yeah, and I agree with most of what you're saying, and I have a slight modification for it. Part of what I've come to believe is that we need to have the conversations regularly, but we need to have them when they make sense.
Yeah.
So, for instance, you may have a goal that's been set, and it's nothing's going to be done on it for 9 months. There's no point in having a regularly scheduled meeting where we talk about, well, you haven't started that one yet. Okay, now let's spend some time twiddling our thumbs because we've covered everything that needs to be covered. And there may be other times where, it has to be every week you're getting together with
Hmm.
somebody because of the nature of the goal that's been
Yeah.
set.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of having these ad hoc meetings that schedule them, but maybe they're for 10 minutes because that's all you need
Absolutely.
to
Yep.
cover a goal, right?
Yep.
As
Yep.
opposed to well, the performance evaluation model tells us that we're supposed to meet every quarter or
Hmm.
every
Hmm.
six
Yeah.
months or
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Okay. So how can people apply valuing people?
I think there are a number of ways. We've talked a bit about performance appraisals and in particular developmental performance appraisals.
Yep.
There's a difference between developmental performance appraisals and evaluative performance appraisals.
Tell
And
us
one of the
more.
things, yeah, and one of the things that we're clear on through the research is that they can't be done at the same time. If you have an evaluative performance appraisal for moving people up the ladder for pay scale or for promotions or what have you, that really has to be a different conversation than developmental performance
And
appraisals,
what's
which I
the
think,
different, how can you explain the different type of conversation?
yeah, well, to me, the difference it's person focused. In terms of what do you need to get done in order to complete your job effectively and meet the goals that the organization has. The evaluative ones are, I've got tick boxes. The
Yeah.
HR department has said that we need to make sure that we have a performance appraisal in place because, we need to be able to dot our I's and cross our T's. And as you know, performance appraisals are usually designed for the 10 or 15% of the working population that provide us with the most grief.
And they're mostly useless.
Yeah, well, there is that. I've done a fair amount of research on performance appraisals, and as far back as the late 50s, when they first started to be, seen as the tool to help people do their
Yeah.
jobs, people were registering, concerns with the process, and to this point now, where I think it's something in the neighborhood of 65% of managers and the employees that they supervise hate them, have no
Yeah.
use for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Okay. So
performance
what's
appraisals,
instead?
uh, I think, to me, one of the simplest ways to introduce valuing people is to do it through what I call stay interviews. You know that most organizations will do an exit interview. In fact, here in BC, it's a mandate of accredited agencies in the child, youth, and family services field, the social services field in general. You must do an exit interview when somebody leaves your organization. And I've always thought that that was rather odd. Somebody
Mhm.
leaves your organization, and first of all, the stats tell us that they won't tell you the truth for the most part.
Nope.
About 80% of people
Not
either,
in.
yeah, 80% of people either refuse to go
Yeah.
to the interview or refuse to say anything that's valuable to the
Why
organization.
bother at that point? You're done.
You're done, and you want the reference, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Um, so I mean, I've always wondered why we focus so much on exit interviews, um, and I'm convinced that if we went to people and we said to them, Kathy, you've been with our organization for 3 years now. When you think about what keeps you here as opposed to taking opportunities elsewhere, what comes to mind?
Yeah.
Because what I've found is that leaders, when they ask those questions, come up with answers where they go, wow, I didn't realize that you saw that as something that was excellent in what we were doing here.
Right.
And
Yep.
if you know that, then you can find a way of doing more of it. And I
Mhm.
really do think that that's a key. You can also ask people questions about the future. When you think about the next year of your career with us, what comes to mind in terms of your hopes and dreams for your job?
Yeah. Yeah.
And now I'm getting information that helps me to support the people that
Mhm.
are responsible for doing the work with our clients.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Absolutely.
really think that stay interviews is a really easy way to implement the valuing people model.
Any other ways that you want to share?
Sure. I mean, I think, we talked a little bit earlier about recognition programs, and I think that if we do individually designed recognition programs, and again, they don't have to cost a lot of money. A very quick story, when I was an ED, we had to go through accreditation. And I mandated that all of my staff had to do something relative to accreditation, that they had a, chapter, whatever, and you had to sign up for a
You do
certain
this,
number.
yeah.
I had two young women come to me, and they came through the door and they said, Bill, you need to know that we're not going to be signing up for any of those chapters. I went, okay, better swallow this and find out, get curious, what's this about? And when they told me, I couldn't have been more overjoyed. They wanted to be the Joy Committee. They wanted to go around to each of these committees that was responsible for doing the work, and they wanted to reward them.
Mm.
And I had visions of, like the budget that they were going to ask for. They asked me for $75. And people, would get little teddy bears. I had one on my bulletin board for 2 years. The last 2 years I worked for the agency. That was a result of them coming into our meeting one day, doing a little song and dance number and saying, we just want to thank you for all your hard work, and here's a token of our appreciation. And the little teddy bear had
Yeah.
a little poem or something attached to it. It sat on my wall for the next 2 years.
It's funny because accreditation seems to be such a hot, stressful time for many organizations.
Yeah.
And this isn't me appreciating my staff so much, but I remember when we were finishing up accreditation, me and my right-hand lady were, I don't know, late, probably it was a Sunday night or something. And my husband showed up with donuts, which was kind of cool, but he also went out and cleaned her headlights before she drove home in the dark.
Mm,
Just a simple thing like that
yeah.
made the world of difference because she felt appreciated, she felt seen, she felt respected. I mean, if you're going to work late and then have to drive home down a gravel road in the dark, that's not safe. We see
Yeah.
you as a person,
Yeah.
and it makes a difference.
Well, and the beauty of it all is that, with the internet available to us, just do a Google search and find out, inexpensive recognition. You'll come up with thousands
Tons.
of them.
Yeah.
And once you find out what it is that motivates people, what is their intrinsic motivation as opposed to, the extrinsic stuff, I think you'll find that you're able to do things that not only bring joy to that person, but you feel good about as well.
Yeah.
And that creates a stronger bond.
Totally. And when you value your people, it just changes the workplace environment
Absolutely.
exponentially.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add before we wind up today?
No, I mean, I think that perhaps the one thing is a paper I wrote once. I said that, we need to value people as assets on our balance sheet as opposed to expenses on our income statements. Because in that metaphor, when you have a capital asset, you invest in it. When you have an expense, you control it. And to me, what's really critical about valuing people is to treat them as assets, not just say they are, to
Yeah.
be able to find a way to invest in those assets.
You can't just give lip service to this stuff.
No,
And it's
no, it
not a
has to be.
tick box that you check off at the end of the day.
Absolutely not. No, it has to be part of your being, which brings us full circle to the beginning of this talk, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It really has to be part of your personal value system and philosophy.
And what I'm going to tell you, folks listening, is it goes back to what I talk about all the time. You cannot walk into work and shut your emotions off at the door. You care about people. Compassion is an emotion. Feeling, connected, feeling concerned for, those are emotions. You got to bring it. And I think too many people try and walk into work and like, shut it off. And I'm just going to be, all business. That's not how we create really strong, effective teams. You build relationships, and relationships are messy sometimes.
Absolutely, they are. Yeah, no doubt about that.
All right, Bill, where can people find you, follow you? I'll put some links in the show notes, but where do you want them to be sent to?
Well, I have a website called valuingpeople.ca. My crack technical squad is helping me to revamp the website. So I'm hoping over the next month that it will have a lot more on it than it does currently. but that's the number one area is the website. And certainly if people want to get in touch with me, we can give them my work email address. It's bill.scott with 2 T's at innovationpartners, plural all one word.com.
All right. And I will make sure those links are in the notes. So thank you for joining us today, Bill. Much appreciate your wisdom and your suggestions and your ideas. Next month, folks, I will be interviewing Leanne Picot, who is from the Leadership Leap, and she is all about supporting women, emerging leaders as we move forward. So you'll want to put February 6th on your calendar for that one. So keep in tune for that. So again, thank you, Bill. Thank you for joining me today. For those of you, I apologize for the technical difficulties, part of life. But it's when we work to build ourselves, grow ourselves, develop ourselves, that we build that confidence and we get out of survival mode, which many leaders are in, and we move to thriving, both in leadership and in life. And that's my goal for you. All right.